Please buckle up for 90 minutes of exploration into how we might spread the capability to have more collaborative, better conversations, and how we might adopt a possibility mindset as a mechanism for doing that. At the end, our takeaways are some ideas about that spreading of collaborative conversations, but perhaps in the form of great questions. And perhaps also in the form of ways of continuing to generate those fabulous questions going forward. Our host today is Paulina LaRocca. She said it was a fabulous accent earlier. And Paulina will tell us a little bit more about her background, but Paulina submitted a design for the New Rules for Work experiment that was a cool design, but didn't quite let us test some of the things we were trying to test. So we're here to experience that design and the potential of that approach fresh and see if we can put it to use in our work and help inform her work as well. As we do, as always, feedback is welcome. So please deploy the feedback link in a browser of your choice so that it is ready for you when time comes and you say, I have to go, but I don't want to forget to leave feedback for Paulina because she will love to have that. And with that, Paulina, I will watch the admit button and let in our tardy friends who I'm sure are coming. And
if not, it'll be small and intimate, so it doesn't matter.
Intimate is always nice in the afternoon. So
yeah.
Or the morning, right, Lonnie? So I'll turn it over to you. All yours.
Cool. So I am Paulina LaRocca, and thank you very much for coming today. I am based in Sydney, Australia, so I am technically in the future. I'm on Wednesday's time. And yes, I am actually going to be recording this. Well, it is being recorded, but I will actually also be using this as part of research in my PhD. You won't be identified or anything like that, but if you would like to opt out, you can also say no. But it just means that we'll be reviewing the recording once we're through. A little bit of my background, 20 years in corporate, working in the innovation space. And I got curious about the relationship between creativity and innovation. So in 2012, I did a Master's of Science in Creative Problem Solving in Buffalo, New York. And that got me more and more interested in deeper questions. And it's hence I've gone out and worked for myself in my own business. I've got 3 published books. And yes, as of a year ago, I started the PhD to go into more deeply into these areas of creativity that I had some challenges and questions about, and which we will touch on very briefly tonight. So tonight's agenda, and there's only, and I'm going to presume at this present point that potentially there's only 4 of us. But yes, 2 of you. We may not use the whole time. We'll see how we actually go because smaller groups do move faster. But I was hoping for it to be quite interactive and experiential. But considering it's also going to be intimate, please feel free to ask questions as we go through, etc. The plan for tonight was just to give you just a teeny bit of theory about what is actually happening in the world of creativity, and then an exercise, which looks like it will be with the 2 of you, but maybe we'll just do a discussion, but an exercise to have a bit of a chat. And then I was going to come back in, give you a little bit more theory, and this time just a little bit deeper into how to do creative questions, and then a little bit of practice. And as Elise said, rather than actually resolving this and leaving this on an idea of how to fix, leaving it more open in ways in which we can experience the possibilities. So potentially to invite a little bit of serendipity into your lives. Does that make sense? Cool. Cool. Thumbs up. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to give you just a tiny bit of theory about what's actually happening in the creativity world and some of the changes that we're actually seeing and how we are thinking about creativity. And in some camps, it's actually being relabeled the new science of possibilities. And it's moving away from an ideas perspective and moving more towards a possibilities perspective. And what it really is doing is challenging, and there is a bit of a revolution right now in the creativity scholarship. It is challenging ideas about the I or form of creativity, or even the he form of creativity, which is the lone genius who rebels against society and has this almost innate gift to see things that other people can't see, and in this process creates a breakthrough. And that typically has been our myths about creativity, and typically those people that would come up as icons of this would be male. And there's a real push to actually move towards a we form of creativity, which is a more social and connected creativity, because no one comes from nowhere. So there is no view from nowhere. So even if you have a lone quote unquote genius, they are part of the fabric of society. All ideas and questions are inherent in a culture, yet how people combine them and connect them is some of the differences with how these people may actually seem to be more creative, but that capability is almost baked into our culture. And what it's looking at is various different ways that we can build bridges of knowledge across maybe disparate views, disparate cultures, to actually make new connections. And there is a theory that going backwards, that is actually what has been done. And I will refer to and give you a case study of one person who's a male, unfortunately, because there is another one, Helen Keller, you would know as well, that we can look at. But Einstein's theory of relativity is actually considered in his biography, not necessarily a pure breakthrough in the sense of it rebelled against everything science did. And in his area, what it was a semantic breakthrough. He used different metaphors to describe what physicists knew about, and therefore they could relate. And it's important to understand that Einstein at this time was looking for a university professorship and was being rejected. So he was not in the school of thought, and he was actually working at the Swiss post office at that time. So he had the knowledge base because he had already graduated, but he wasn't in the system. And to some degree, that allowed him to build a new bridge of knowledge. He wasn't hemmed in, we got an image, pardon me. He wasn't hemmed in by the current existing metaphors. And what he created was a new set of metaphors that made new connections, that caused new breakthroughs, that allowed the existing camps to actually understand and relate to them, but see them in different ways that enabled breakthroughs. Helen Keller would be another one in which the breakthrough really was not Helen's, but was her teacher, Anne Sullivan's, who actually persisted in believing that Helen, as deaf, blind, and not hearing, sorry, what is it? Mute is the other one I actually wanted to deaf, blind, and mute, was capable of actually learning, but needed to understand the concept of concepts and symbols and signs. And what she did was persist, and what she opened up was an incredible world to Helen, who was actually able to understand how things can represent something else, how a sign can actually represent water. And there's another argument of thought that says that we communicate completely through metaphors and through analogies, and that the way that we make sense of the world is by comparing it to something else. And what I'm suggesting through my work is that if we actually move from beyond the current metaphors and look at different metaphors or different ways of actually cultures and perspectives of seeing things, that you will ignite more possibilities and more questions. So before I go on any further, I would like to take a step and say there's only two of us. Any thoughts or comments or questions? Well, actually, sorry, there's more than two of us, there's three of us, sorry. Elise, you're very welcome as well. Yeah, any thoughts, comments, questions? That would be lovely.
No, not at this time.
Cool, makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Cool, so underpinning this bridging of knowledge and looking from different perspectives is also a deeper concept, which is called the deferral of judgment. You may have heard it sometimes in a brainstorming where we actually say no idea is a bad idea. Technically, that is deferring judgment. And what we're asking people to do is just momentarily suspend their judgment to entertain new possibilities. That is usually held in ideation, in brainstorming, and that is considered the best perspective for generating new ideas, to allow weird and wonderful stuff to jump up so that we can actually make connections and make new ideas. What I'm suggesting is we're going to enter into the state at the beginning of the process, so right now. And later in this session, I will give you some deliberate ways of actually igniting that space through questions. But today, I'm just going to, for right now, just introduce the concept, and then we're going to have a little bit of a play with something that will hopefully ignite it. But it's not actually an absence of judgment. It's more a moving between two states. On one end, accepting that we all judge. We do. We have perspectives, we have knowledge. It's neither good nor bad. We have a way of viewing the world and moving through it. And then it's actually being curious about the way that we view the world, which usually throws us to look at the other end of this perspective, that kind of universal wonder. And it's moving between the two of when we judge and we don't judge, and we get curious about why the way the world is the way it is, or why this problem actually even exists. And between those two states, as we move, new ideas and new possibilities can occur. And to give you a little bit of brain science, we do know that highly creative people, and that's all they actually worked on, do actually diverge and converge at the same time. They're actually oscillating between the states. And I would suggest that anyone who's highly accomplished at anything is oscillating between those two states. Because you know a lot and you're like, oh, I judge this, and you're like, oh, what about over here? And it's that movement between the two and that action and that energetic tension that actually generates new ideas. You will also see it coming up in paradoxes, in archetypes, etc., where we consider both sides at once as not being oppositional, but being relational. Because at the end of the day, everything is all connected. So at one point, there is relationships. So when we talk about problems and we talk about solutions, we tend to see them as oppositional, about things we want to fix. And sometimes we move into a mechanistic metaphor of fixing, correcting, engineering, etc. And it's more about accepting that everything is connected and moving in a more organic way of actually saying that potentially nothing is ever fixed. It's moving, it emerges, it continues to shape and morph, and how we actually move with that. Cool. Welcome, Neil. Thank you for coming up. What a shame. You missed a lot of the upfront kind of theory, and I was just about to actually kind of give us an exercise to actually play with some of these ideas.
We'll catch him up. We'll catch him up. No problem.
Cool. So yeah, so today we've actually come to actually talk about this question about having actually better conversations. And what I would love for us to actually do, and maybe the nicest way is for you to actually go into a group of 3 and have a conversation, not so much about what the problem is, but really what the opportunity, and not even the opportunity is. I'd go further. What would the world look like if this did not exist? And it's not so much trying to say what's the opposite or what is oppositional to it, but actually move into the future state. Defer judgment and move into that future state and say, what would it feel like? What would it be like? How would I feel? How would it be if this problem no longer exists and conversations were already a beautiful thing and the way of moving and relating in the world? And all I want you to do is have a conversation about it. See what metaphors actually emerge. Yeah, and see if your view actually starts to shift about how you perceive this to be, and see if some opportunities or new thinking starts to emerge. Not necessarily new ideas, but you can have new ideas. That's not a problem. But yeah, see if some new possibilities actually emerge by moving into that state. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh,
Can you restate the question one more time? Just so I can, I would love to type it.
Okay. I had shortened it to how to have more beautiful conversations. Yep. We will go back to the original question, which was much more detailed, but at this present point, I'm just kind of leaving it as how to have more beautiful conversations, or even that almost suggests that we need to have it. So how to be in a world where beautiful conversations are the norm. Yep. That we no longer even talk about beautiful conversations because that is what exists, and it'd be weird not to. And it is about moving into that possibilities mindset. And I guess I'll give you two pieces of information. Possibilities mindset sometimes is seen as the fanciful or the unrealistic. But the reality is, if we can actually imagine it, to some degree, we bring about it and make it real. Because then if we can imagine it, it already exists in the fabric of our social constructs. So it's kind of thinking about possibilities not as what is fanciful or what is not real or what is wishful, but what is out there that we want to bring in closer. And the brain does not distinguish between what is vividly imagined and what is real. It does understand fact and fiction, absolutely, but when you vividly imagine something, which is a little bit different state than creativity, and the brain gets excited about that, its neurons fire as if that was real. So by moving into possibilities and having this discussion to some degree already, we are resolving it by bringing it in closer because we are believing it is real. Cool. We do have time, so I would love for you to actually have a 15-minute conversation that will allow you to have a little bit of exchange of dialogue, etc. But yeah, I think more than anything else, it's the conversations and the moments of not being rushed that actually are fruitful bearings and will open up the space of new insights and new connections. So cool. So on that moment, if you could help put all three together, that would be wonderful.
I have a breakout room set up. I will whisk you away. It's set for 15 minutes.
Cool.
Before we go, I have, since there's so few, I could interrupt.
Yes, of course, you can.
You said, didn't you say that you were going to suggest that some particular thing will no longer be true? If something did not exist in the world, how would we have better conversations, for example?
Yes. For example, the problem doesn't exist. So oftentimes what we tend to do is start with a problem and then think almost, how do we fix that problem? Or how do we actually, and you start from the problem. And what I'm suggesting is, instead of starting from the problem, we start from, what if this problem no longer existed? What would that world be like? What would that feel like, taste like, smell like? Make it vivid as possible. And then what we'll do is maybe we'll come back and look at this, but I think you will see this very different. And it's not about what do we wish, it's going further and saying, what would it be like? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. A second question. Elise put the problem statement on the chat. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. But at this present point, because it's full of lots of problems, so to speak, I'm not necessarily going there right this second, but when you come back, we will specifically address that exact problem and unpack it a little bit further. But right now, I just want you to take an opportunity of almost washing yourself off of that problem. Consider it a metaphorical shower. Yeah, step into a future that you might like to occupy and tell me what it's like when you come back.
All right, I've got 15 minutes set. If your conversation happens to end before then and you need to come back because there are 3 of you, I've also made it possible for that to happen. So go ahead and enjoy yourselves while you live in this world where all of our conversations are beautiful. Enjoy your beautiful conversation.
Cool. Cool. Tell me a little bit more about what you discussed. Yes, awesome. Awesome. And there you go. I'm done. Cool.
Well,
please share more.
How would you guys describe? I think we went around in terms of talking about conversation, and then Lonnie brought, and then we were talking about putting some body to beautiful conversations. Lonnie mentioned, I think what's really important in beautiful conversations, or at least conversations, correct me if I'm wrong, you two, is that there needs to be some intention, and everybody, and I mentioned that sometimes intentions are not always the same. So there needs to be a conversation around intention first. So we experimented with that. We started to talk about our intentions about this conversation. Is that right, Neil? Does that seem to characterize what we did?
Yes. Lonnie, would you
Tell
agree?
me a little bit about how that discussion impacted. I'm not necessarily interested in the details, but yeah, interested in how it made you feel, or connections, or insights.
I think it kind of opened up space to think a little bit, and then to clarify, and just sort of, I guess, be together without any pressure of time or demand, or it was interesting.
I think one insight I had as Paulina, as you were talking, and then what I think I hope to have brought into the conversation was the elements of mindful meditation. and what that means is that in mindful, as my understanding of mindful meditation, and I've been doing it for many, many, many years, like 50, is that you just take in whatever the experience is. You just look at it, you examine it, and if you wonder about it, look at it, but then move it aside. But you don't ignore anything. And that's, so it was like this surfing. I was surfing through our conversations.
These are beautiful ideas, and yeah, I'm not an expert in mindful meditation, but I do understand and feel that there's an intuitive bridge between, yeah, this idea of deferring judgment, which is just accepting what is. As you said, it's not ignoring it or pretending it, it's just accepting what that is and kind of just riding through it. And I love the analogy of the surfing, or whether it's a metaphor, it doesn't matter, but that beautiful way of actually moving. It's alive, it's being, and what you said about Lonnie, about opening up space and just allowing that to actually occur before we actually, yeah, start to dive in. Yeah, it's almost like a way of opening up. And for me, it is about inviting more possibilities in, yeah, and allowing them to be entertained, not in the sense of we always have to name them and identify them, but more in the sense that we, as you said, ride with them, feel them, because we are. And there's a good argument that says that all our thinking does not happen in the brain. It happens as much in the body and in our being as it does in the brain. And they are challenging today whether or not plants have consciousness and some kind of understanding of how the world moves. They can predict, they can change, they can alter the behaviors. They don't have a brain the way that we do. So there's a general acceptance that there are other ways of being and knowing, and that our cognition or our understanding may not always be based in our minds or in our brains. But yeah, we are a whole body. It's the movement between the two and the surfing between the two. I think it's a really beautiful way to start creative problem solving, or to start a challenge, is by just opening it up and actually being able to see where we are without necessarily having to judge it. Cool. And on our end, we actually by chance did the exercise too. So we did Gilbert and Sullivan, and we did Joy, oh Joy, and we talked about paradoxes, and we talked about new ways of actually thinking about things. So yeah, I would say hopefully it was a joyous experience all the way around. Any other thoughts, comments, questions about the experience thus far?
I think the premise that we've already established, beautiful conversations are the norm, is amazing. But looking at some of the meetings I was in today, it's so far. We have so far to go. So.
But sometimes bringing that spirit in, as naive as it sometimes sounds, can sometimes actually help shift it. And what I will give you in the next exercise is some practical ways. And sometimes they're a little bit, they're not obvious. You don't have to say, I'm going to do this, but they're a way of actually shifting, hopefully, some of those conversations into a world of possibilities. Yes, and getting people to actually start to ride that wave with you. Cool. Any other thoughts or comments? No. Cool. All right, I'm going to give you just a touch more theory, and I am going to move to slides. But unfortunately, not all things can be done slide free, but yes. So bear with me. You would think after all this time that we would know exactly how to share, and we should be seamless at this, and we never are. So share screen, beautiful. The green button that is actually staring at me, beautiful. Cool, we should be able to see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Cool. So we start creative questions often with, and you'll be familiar with these, I am sure, how might we, which emphasizes interconnectionness, what might be all the ways. It's a very typical start of a creative question or an innovation question, and it's a lovely start. And what it actually is doing is inviting possibilities. However, I would argue oftentimes that what we do is kind of destroy the value of that opener by shoving the problem right back in. So, and we're really kind of saying, how might we stop something, or how might we fix something? So what I really want to do is actually look at the second half of that question and how to unpack it more beautifully. I'm also going to touch very briefly on, sometimes questions are started with how to. Oh, but oftentimes, and more often than not, they're actually started with how can. And in the English language in particular, we slip a lot into how can in our colloquial and everyday conversations. And I want you to have an awareness of the word how can, because linguistically, it implies that it cannot be done. But also, I'll argue that energetically, there's a little bit of a downer on how can. It kind of shifts it from opening up possibilities to almost like, how can you do that? And it kind of shifts it from a we thing to a you thing. And there's an implication that that can be solved. So there can be a little bit of, use that, a sting in the tail when we use how can. So I would love to say that when we actually do that, sometimes we can't sit there and go, well, what might be all the ways? It might be not appropriate, but thinking more about how to. And even as I say that, I can't be as convergent as how can. It just doesn't work. It has a lilt, it has an upness, it has an invitation, it invites people in. So yes, and maybe as an exercise, have an awareness of how often we do slip into how can statements, and see even if shifting into a how to just opens up a little more space. And speaking to you, Neil, even slight shifts like this can help people to kind of just release from the problem just a little bit and start to move into that world of possibilities a little bit more easily, without necessarily having to re-engineer the whole meeting, because sometimes we're not in charge of the meetings that we're in. And then moving on with it, and what I'm going to give you is an opportunity to practice creative questions, is what we can do. And the reason why I'm focusing on creative questions is, if you want to shift people into a possibilities mindset, a beautiful question opens that up and invites them to step into it. And so in essence, you are creating that world. So my creative questions top tips are to focus on the opportunity, not on the problem. So most creative questions actually end with the problem in some way, shape, or what we're trying to avoid, but to learn to focus on the opportunity. And I will go into a little bit more depth with some examples about what that is to make it aspirational. I think we shy away from emotions. We slip into the mechanistic metaphors of how to fix something, how to engineer something, etc. And human societies are not machines. This is definitely coming from the 50s and the computer age, and we haven't let it go. And we and our minds are not computers either. So being aware of actually making it aspirational. We as humans speak to emotion. We are actually moved by emotion. So yeah, make it deeply motivating. And how you do that is connecting it to your values, what we want the world to be. And making it simple and powerful. Language that moves people to act. And David Ogilvy, in one of his books, and I forget the actual names, said one of the Greeks stood up and gave a wonderful speech, and everyone thought, God, he's wise. And the next one gave up and gave a speech, and everyone went, let's march. And it's kind of that analogy. You want to actually say, let's march. Let's have a question that actually makes people think, I want to get into that and I want to do something. And make it personal. It's not about someone else. And we often have to make our creative questions abstract. It's about what they should do or what they, etc. It is about us. We are connected with this. We are all interconnected. And I'll give you one last kind of overarching tip, which is focus on the benefits, not on the features. And I will give you an example that I always use about toothpaste. You know, toothpaste does lovely things, it cleans your teeth, etc. But really what you want is it gives you lovely minty breath, or it makes you kissable. You know, but that's the benefit of why we actually clean our teeth, you know? Yeah, sure, we don't want to go to the dentist and all that kind of stuff too often. But yeah, but it's social proofs us and allows us to actually have conversations knowing that we're okay. So yeah, so talking to the deeper motivations. And I once had a semiotician, they do the science of signs and symbols, talk about people never buy things because of what they want to some degree. They're triggered by their deepest fears. And to some degree, yeah, not being able to have beautiful breath and to be able to express yourself without fear is a motivator to get into these things. And then we look at what we bring out as the beauty of that, which is, yeah, I like it to be almost kissable. is a really nice way of actually looking at it. So focusing on the benefits, not necessarily the features. And I'm going to give you a few examples, and then I'll actually open it up for questions, and then we're going to have a little bit of a play. So this is an example from, and these are real examples that I have worked on with groups very recently. This is an example from the Red Cross, and it gave it to a project team, and it was, how might we support, so lovely start, how might we support aging communities to build strong social capital in the face of a changing world? And it's not the world's most loveliest question, but they worked very hard on that question. They were very proud. And most people kind of go, oh, that's an amazing question. I really like that. But I'll point out interesting things. This typically happens in a creative question. How might we support? So it's suggesting a very passive form. Like, how might we support? It's not suggesting we're there. It's actually suggesting, do we want to support? So it's a bit like that David Ogilvy conversation. Do we want to actually impress you with how well we know it, or do we want you to actually march? So is it how might we support? Or what do we need to give these people that would actually give them what? Looking at aging communities, again, it's communities. We are part of that community. We describe them as something other than us. We are all aging, by the way. And to build strong social capital in the face of a changing world. I do and I don't know what this question means. I can guess it, but honestly, it's a lot of hard work. And does it actually motivate me to march? Absolutely not. It's okay. Well, we'll do it. But like, I get the correctness. So I'm going to show you what the group came up with. How might we age with the elderly to bring back their youth? And there's a really beautiful sentiment. And when this was actually shown back to the Red Cross, what the woman said, and I saw the tape, just yesterday, and I'd forgotten this, she said, oh gosh, it's like you read my mind. And this was a group of all the groups that she really resonated with. From their question, she had already bought whatever they were going to say. And what we were playing with is, we are now aging with the elderly. We are no longer divorced with them. We are now part of them. And we're playing with things with age and youth. And we're almost having this oppositional tension, but yet we're actually saying there's relationships there. And really, what do we want? Do we want aging communities to feel supported? Or in some ways, do we want to capture the beauty of their youth? And that's not about making them younger, but it's about bringing that vibrancy and vitality back to their lives in a way that we all can appreciate. So I would argue this is a much stronger question and also invites possibilities, because there is some tension in there in a really beautiful sort of way that makes us have to vividly imagine it in a way to invite possibilities and to start to think about solutions, unlike this one. I'll give you two more and then I will open it up for questions. So another one, and this was from a team who are starting a business. How might we inspire tangible accountability for our health behaviors and outcomes at a deeply personal level? So yes, I kind of get what they're talking about. I kind of don't. So what we actually worked on it together, and what might be all the ways, and we chose that one because we wanted to suggest endless possibilities to put us in the driver's seat of our health. And again, this one maybe suggests more of an app or a measurement tool, and it's starting to converge right at the start of the process. Whereas this one allows us to actually ideate forever to some degree. Yet it grows with us, it grows with the business, it grows with our thinking, etc. And again, it invites possibilities. And also I think it's really actionable. You know what to do. And this kind of metaphor of driver's seat of our health, instead of saying, how might we empower people? And do we want to empower people, or do we want them to have the power to act? And what is that action? This one actually says driver's seat. And then the last one, what might be all the ways we can empower parents to guide and assist? Do we want parents to guide and assist, or do we want parents to be better parents? And what is that? In the developmental outcomes of their children in play therapy. And what we did was, what might be all the ways our kids' creativity can sparkle in therapy? And we chose kids quite deliberately because our children is still abstract. Kids is what we call people colloquially. They're our kids. So so just referring to them as how we talk about them, it has more emotion. And particularly we love this idea of sparkle because it suggested that there will be good and bad times. Sparkles go in, they go out. It's a more active, more alive. And we understand that there will be twinkling moments. And it's the beauty of both, rather than trying to always make parents perfect or kids perfect. It's accepting that there is beauty in that imperfection and knowledge to be gained. So cool. So I am going to stop sharing. And by the way, you can have any slides out of this that you want, etc. But yeah, I might open up the floor to any thoughts, questions, challenges. And you don't have to agree with me. You can suggest that the other questions are better. It's a conversation. I'm just giving you the benefit of another view of how I play with questions at the start to invite more possibilities and to make people more excited about how to enter into it.
Well, I certainly could see how the second statements in all three examples were more powerful. They were definitely more simple. It actually brought the people into the people having the conversation or answering the question more into it rather than have it removed. There was on the first one, I did have an issue with that, the second one. And I imagine you have to be careful. One has to be careful about the words that are being used, and it's the word youth. How might we have the aging become more youthful? I don't know what the actual words were, but that's basically what I heard. And as an aging youth myself, I think it's important to ask, how do we age well rather than be a youth? Because that it has an inherent bias, which is more constricting than looking at possibilities.
And I would agree with you in the sense that these questions need to actually really work for the question owner. So what we were trying to get at youth was not necessarily the idea of youth as young being better, but some of that vibrancy back, that curiosity. And agreed, then if I were working with you, I would actually say, what is the attributes that we actually want to do? What is aging better? Yeah, what does that mean for us? And what are those attributes that we can bring to life? And what we were trying to bring forward was a vibrancy. Whether or not we achieved it, it's totally understandable and very personal. Yeah. And that may not be the right words for you either. You might think, no, vibrancy is not. Yeah, we're trying to hark back to something maybe instead of jumping forward. Yeah, yeah. And these questions, they look pretty easy now that we've actually resolved them, but they take probably a good 20 minutes to a half an hour working with me to actually get to this. As we play with words and we go back and forth and we kind of go, what are we trying to say? And it really is kind of, it's not easy to jump straight into a possibilities mindset because we're so trained to say what we don't want or what's wrong. It's really hard sometimes just to see what is or where we would like to go. And not in the sense of, there's a woman who actually says, we try to depict the future as a place like a tourism place of where we would like to be, but really moving into that future and standing from that future orientation and looking at us today. And there is an Australian Aboriginal who wrote a book that was quite the talk here. It was called Sand Talk. And what he did that was so revolutionary was, instead of describing Indigenous thinking and then showing us how we as non-Indigenous people should understand it, he took an Indigenous standpoint and looked at us and said, damn, you people are weird. It's like, oh, we are. And when you look from their point of view at us, which we're not used to seeing the lens that way, it really did open up some really beautiful spaces. And for me, the most powerful one he spoke to is how we problem solve, in which that we actually define the problem and then we fix it, etc. We run in, and then at the end of it, we go, oh, only we'd asked. Only we'd kind of talk with you more. Whereas they start from a place of respect, that nobody actually understands the challenge or issues that we're working on. And we're actually going to enter into this space understanding that we not only don't understand, we may never understand, and we may never agree, but we're going to actually look and understand the viewpoints and play with those. And from a Western point of view, we don't have time. We're like, come on, get with it. Like, what are you going to do? Spend a couple hours a day doing that? Like, it's ridiculous. But in essence, that cohesion allows them to move as a coordinated group, not in agreement, and nor are they trying to, but actually understanding their tensions and being able to ride those tensions, a bit like your metaphor of the surfing. Cool. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
So how do you, let's say you start with a negatively framed or complexly framed abstruse problem statement, and you're looking to find the delighter that inspires, but at the same time, you're not trying to dictate the directionality of the conversation, right? How do you go about finding a positive framing that isn't in and of itself overly constrained to one set of possibilities? Did that?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And it's often tapping into the values. So people often come with a solution or a hint of a solution, but I'm like, why are you doing this? Like, what is it that you believe in? And for the Red Cross, it was like, we actually believe that it is our role to actually help our communities thrive as much as possible where the government has incapable of either connecting. But yeah, it's really about embedding ourselves in the community. That's who we stand for, and that's the hill we'll die on. And when you start to get to your values about why is it driving you, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. Yep. What is it that it often has to come from inside? It's, you know, we can say, well, we want people to be healthier. It's like, why do you care? And suddenly you find a story of either my health was impacted or my dad or my mom's health was impacted. And then you get that deeper story, and it's there that you start to think, I know now why you care so much. And when I see what you care about, we can talk about how you would want it to feel almost for others. Yeah, and it's almost like you're taking that opportunity to rewrite your story in a way that if you could give that gift to others, what would that be? And that may not be not having to go through a journey with a patient with cancer or your dad with cancer, but what would you want maybe those resources to be, or how would you want to feel protected? Maybe, and when you start to get into those areas, we get into powerful human motivations, and we start to enter that space together. And then it's just about then getting curious and exploring. And we talked about earlier about deferring judgment. It's not about an absence of judgment. Sometimes it's about going to why we judge, why we have an issue, and then getting curious about why we care. What do we value in that? And maybe what do we hope for others if they were there too, knowing what we know today? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm thinking about, so this particular conversation came up because of the New Rules for Work experiment, right? And in that experiment, we're tackling questions, challenges that are global.
Yeah.
Where the people who might be presenting the challenge and the people who are involved in that endeavor represent a myriad of different value systems.
Yeah.
So finding the sparkle at the end of, you know, how do we deal with, one of our questions is, how might we ensure that underutilized commercial buildings are used in ways that benefit the planet? Well, yeah. The owners of the commercial real estate buildings want the monies, right? Like they got nobody in their building. They need the monies, and that's really what they care about. And the people who are trying to save the fish have completely different values going into play. So, you know, if I picked those two people to talk about, I would be like, what is a world where we have aquariums in the middle of every city? Would be a wonderful, beautiful statement, but it wouldn't be big enough.
Yep.
So I'm just thinking about like, and the question we have today. So I'm sure you've got something planned for us to tackle the collaborative thing or something as our.
Yes, but I do want to touch upon us, and maybe we record the session because maybe we can play with that. But what I will say for the benefit is sometimes that we shy away from the paradoxes or the tensions in the questions. So I would, if we were doing this, I would start to say, how do we actually play with this idea of value? And underneath value underneath money sits a value. And oftentimes it's freedom is often the deepest value that sits underneath money. So let's not ignore that there is a value underneath that we can explore, because yeah, they may want money, but people are deeper than that at one level, and we should respect that they might be and trust that they will be. But yeah, so how do we actually play with those which seems oppositional but actually aren't? Because there should be a way that we can actually give people security and freedom while giving other people a different type of security and freedom. And right now, just playing with that, I can see that there is a shared value system, but maybe a different way of entering it. And maybe it's not necessarily, I think, as I speak in this case, but yeah, maybe it's not necessarily seeing that as oppositional, but at the end of the day, there is some commonality there that we can play with. Yes, it will be expressed very differently, but that actually might be really interesting for us to explore. Does that make sense?
It does. I don't think the challenge is so much in the paradoxes as it is in finding a single beautiful question across a spectrum of value landscapes. But
Sure.
Absolutely. So I don't want to take any more of your time.
No,
So
but I think it's a good conversation. I think would help. And for me, it's not necessarily that it's the paradoxes, but it's also learning to actually sometimes incorporate tensions into questions, because the reality is that is the world. There will always be tension. So it's not necessarily being Pollyanna and necessarily looking at the opportunity. It's really looking at the benefits of what that world would be like and how it can actually address those values. But as we said, enough talking, so to speak. Let's have a little bit of a play. So I am going to put the original question back into chat. Uh-oh, there you go. Dude. How might we equip, oh, sorry, I will send. How might we equip everyone with the capability to have better, more collaborative conversations focused on impact and forward action? And what I would love for you to actually do is spend the next 10 minutes, because we are at 11:04, 12 minutes. We've got a little bit of time. Yeah, just playing with that and seeing if you can actually write a better question. If you have an amazing conversation and you don't necessarily come back with a better question, that's fine too. If you want to actually think more deeply about some of the things I suggested, do what is right for you in this group. But if you do have a crack of a question, I would love for you to share it, and let's see where we go. But yeah, it's a way of actually, hopefully, yeah, opening up new space by thinking about the slightly different. Cool. As I always say, on your bikes. I didn't know I said that until somebody else said. As Paulina said, on your bikes. And I'm like, oh, I do say that.
all right. Neil, Lonnie, and Bruce, go have a play. I bet you guys had this conversation too, right? Where you were doing a lot of this, where you're like, if we take it and we go like that, it will be.
And unfortunately, we lost the chat, so we have no idea what we said.
This is going everywhere and every place or whatever it is, all at once.
Exactly.
If only I had the sausage fingers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Lordy.
This is what we came up with. It's in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. How do we enable our world to have more collaborative conversations that result in impactful action? Cool. My next question to every single group, whoever does this exercise with me, is out of 1 to 10, 10 being amazing, 1 being okay, or blah. How do you rate that as a question energetically? How do you feel about it?
I think it's something I can definitely get behind, and I would say it's a 8 or a 9 for sure.
Yeah, I'd go with no.
Cool. All right.
I'm about an 8.
Okay.
I'm an 8, and I think what I was just about to say before we got zapped back into the reality of the real world was I wonder whether we take out the word more and just how do we just enable everyone to have collaborative conversation? Yeah, so because I think sometimes, you know, the word more can go, does that mean we're not doing it now? And it can cause friction where there might not be any friction. And, you know, if we just say, let's just enable it, we turn on the tap or the waterfall, back to Bruce's metaphor earlier.
Do you mind just fixing that and just putting that into the chat so that I can work from that next iteration? Because I would support that, and I think that's a great start. Sorry, Elise, I think you were going to say something.
Well, they did. They've chatted it, so that's awesome. I'm curious about the word enable.
That came from me. Sorry, because we were trying to think of something better than capability, and sort of a bit more, you know, what's the result of having capability? You feel enabled. You
Mm.
feel like you can do something, was where I was going on this.
Cool. And I actually just had a play with cutting off the back half. I'll come back to you, Elise, which I thought you were suggesting, Lonnie, which was, yeah, how do we enable everyone to have collaborative conversations? It's just simpler and more to the point. That result in there.
That was actually one of the options.
Yeah.
That we had, but we thought that it missed the impactful action piece.
Ideally, we want them to result in some kind of action. And it
Yeah.
needs to be impactful. It can't just be action for action's sake. It has to have an impact on the world in general. So
I'm going to say that with collaborative, it's almost implying that there is an action by collaborating that is bringing something more new into being, but almost by saying it has to have impactful action. Like, what is impactful action, so to speak? It almost judges what can be, and sometimes the lighter social moments actually do move people, but we tend to skip over them because we think, but that's where the connections, that's where the trust is built, that's where the relationships are. That's actually where I think sometimes change comes about, that it actually, because if you have a connection or relationships with someone, they are much more open to accepting your ideas than necessarily agreeing to an action. So I would challenge our bias for action in the sense of how we often think of the things not being worthy unless it results in something that we can recognize, and opening up that space for letting the conversation go where it needs to go and what arrives, rather than actually almost judging them.
yeah,
And
I would agree with that.
The only thing I question or want, I'm yearning to have, is some kind of adjective that would define collaborative conversations a little more.
I would agree. And I want to go back to Elise's as well. I think enabled is a softer word in the sense that I think that, and it's do we want to create the conditions that do it, or do we want to actually, what are those conditions that would create it? Do we want to live with those conditions already created? So yes, I would agree with Elise. I would play with enable, and I would probably, if this wasn't live, I would go to a thesaurus and actually look at some of those things and what could be more active. And and what do we mean by collaborative conversations? Is it deepening the connection? Is that what we want? Is it, is it, how do we make it like I don't know, a natural partnership? I don't know. Those are some of the things that, yes, I would play with it. I think that we could amp up the juice even stronger with this and take it maybe from a 9 to a 10. And I'm happy to kind of, take this offline and play with you and kind of show you my thinking, because it's hard to do both when you're live, because otherwise I'm kind of in there going, well, what is the word for enable? So,
So here's may I ask you another question about this one?
Go for it. Yeah.
So, how do we enable everyone to have collaborative conversations is my world. That's, I do meeting culture for over a decade. And one thing that is quite clear to me is a whole bunch of people don't want it. They're quite happy to have a whole lot fewer collaborative conversations, or conversations of any form, frankly. Thank you very much. So, so if you have a statement like this, where it's everyone, how do we enable everyone? Would you leave it strong and aspirational? A beautiful world where everyone enjoys collaborative conversations? Or would you temper it to be something like, how might we make it possible for everyone to enjoy collaborative conversations on a regular basis, or something like that, where they could, if they so chose, they weren't limited by an external factor. The only limitation between them and collaborative conversation is the willingness to walk through the door. Yeah. Like that would you do that, or would you like say, you know what, not every question's for every person, so heck with them?
There's an element of that. I don't think I would necessarily tell them. But I would probably say that connecting more deeply is a fundamental human need. So I said that there are certain forms of collaboration that people may not desire, and that's perfectly fine. I respect that. But at a deeper level, we do care to connect. Yes, it's maybe that we have found collaborations the way that they're structured to be not conducive to who we are. So as you were playing with this, and you may not like it, and that's perfectly, but I kind of went to how might we desire connections, and I would play with that word connections that allow all our voices to be heard. Because I'm guessing that maybe the reason why people don't like collaborations is because they feel like they get compromised or minimized in some way. So how do we actually make it so that collaboration is more connecting? And connecting is not strong enough. So I would have to Google and do a thesaurus search, but what are we actually suggesting? Yeah, in a sense, I would like to enter a partnership, and it could be even partnerships. Yeah, in a way that I get made more of than less of. And I think sometimes with collaboration, there's a feeling that we're going to compromise down to something. And I don't get anyone who says, screw that. Yeah, but what great collaborations do is they make me plus. They take Paulina at a 7 and make Paulina feel like an 8 or a 9. And that's what I think, if we bring to life that, I think people will think, I actually would be up. And maybe there's still a percentage of the population that says, you haven't addressed my need. That's not why I hate collaborations. I hate collaborations for these reasons. Yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily leave them behind. I would just be curious about why they don't. And I'm guessing it's because sometimes we feel compromised.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. So what I'm taking away from this, is this okay? Are we at that stage? Are we at the takeaway stage?
Yes, we are. Yes. Thank you, facilitator Elise. No, we are totally.
I'm knowing that we have challenge statements to put out there for this big experiment, and we are in the process of creating those briefings right now. I'm taking away some inspiration to push those statements farther into the possibility and delight spectrum. I think the sessions we're running will be fun anyway, just because they're fast and silly, but making it also an opportunity to envision a world that excites us to enter is a good call to action.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it speaks to our values, and it's not about shying away, from the negative, as Bruce so beautifully held. It's acknowledging it exists, but that there is also beauty in what is. Society exists for a reason that we've all contributed to creating, and it's not shying away from the fact that it has both good and bad in it. But then, how do we amplify what is actually working and using that energy to then actually influence, maybe indirectly, what we would like to see evolve?
What about you? What about you both? What are you taking?
Taking the capability to positively influence the statement about the purpose of the meeting by framing it in such a way that it highlights the possibility that we can come out of this with something different.
Beautiful.
I love that.
I like that. One thing that I don't know if it's a thought, it's a possibility thought, that wouldn't it be great if for us facilitators, or at least those who facilitate and want coaching around their agenda, that we have question labs. I think every agenda item has a question, right?
Yes.
And then some of those questions are explicit in that agenda item that we actually ask the attendees, the participants. And so wouldn't it be great if we had a group like this to mull over the questions so that fit the criteria that you mentioned, Paulina, or other criteria? I just thought that would be kind of a cool thing.
I do think that would be a cool thing. And yes, Neil, I actually made a promise to you that I nearly forgot. So I wanted to give you one little example of how I've used that to influence a meeting that I was not running, and how I use the creative language. So when I worked at corporate, we had a boss who was not creativity trained. And in my last corporate role, I trained a lot of her leadership team on creative language and how to think differently. And she was panicking because the French bigwigs were coming to town, and we had to stay up all night basically and do PowerPoints and justify our jobs because we weren't good enough and we had to prove it and all this kind of stuff. And it was a panic that was ripping through, and you had to stay up all night. And oh my God, the big man in town is coming. And people just started to lean in that were creativity trained and said, like, Anne, how might we take the CEO on a different journey, or a journey through what we do? And that dropped her anxiety level right down to the point where she was actually listening. And she wrote this without even knowing that she was writing this. And the next thing you know, what we agreed on was, why don't we not do PowerPoint? Because that's all these people ever see. And why don't we step them into the world of what we do? And they were like, damn, you people are impressive. And I'm like, yeah, because we were walking our talk instead of trying to justify our butts, which would have been the way that we would have gone, which is, we're scared now of you and we're going to justify ourselves. But we're actually saying, we're proud of what we do. Let us show you what we do. Mm-hmm. And it was, she never knew what happened. And it was my proudest moment in my corporate career, because I was like, wow, how they led that, because I didn't start that, how they led that conversation and how it shifted an outcome without anyone overtly knowing that that's what we were doing.
Yeah, but that's where having at least one other collaborator can definitely make a difference in the outcome.
True, but sometimes just by opening it up, it never underestimate, in my view, when an alternative question that invites possibility instead of a nicer place to be in, it gets opened up. I find that no matter what career they are, whether they're engineers, because always use engineers, they're closed. I'm like, they're people. They're so open. Yeah, people start to edge towards that because it's a nicer place to be.
I like that, though. How might we take them on a journey through what we do? That's
Beautiful.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
cool.
and speaking of journeys,
yes, it wraps us up. So if you need my details, I probably won't be necessarily in the chat, but I will put my details in the chat. But yeah, by all means, ask any questions, follow up with any thoughts and stuff like that. If you do have a creative question and just want to play, I am more than happy to do it. I believe very passionately in what I do. So I'm also happy to share as much knowledge as I can to make the world a better place.
So
and
Paulina,
on that note,
I will leave you with a suggestion.
Thank you.
You can take Bruce's idea and create a collab possibility question lab forum post.
Yeah.
And we would use the heck out of that. If you want an international community of facilitators to help you hone your skills and your process of how you get from a weak corporate speak baloney boats question into a question that invites delight, then this is a good opportunity to practice. So I invite you to add that. We have a channel for incubating experiments like that. And this would be a fabulous one. That'd be fun.
Very cool. Very cool. Cool.
So,
all right. Well, thank you very much. Elise, if you want to stay on for just a little longer, we'll say goodbye. Cool. But thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.